Brookes here. Thanks for tuning into Books with Brookes, one day after the election. I hope everyone's holding up okay. I am recording this before the election, so hello from the past. Before we jump into today's episode, which is an interview with my friend and fellow podcaster and self-published children's book author J.D. Hyman, I would like to remind you all that our November book is called The Girl with the Louding Voice by Abby DeRay. Pick it up. It sounds like it's going to be amazing. It has excellent reviews, a bunch of award lists, etc. So now, without further ado, I give you my conversation with J.D. Hyman. Enjoy. Hello, welcome to Books with Brookes. I'm here with my friend JD. Hi, JD.
Hey, Brooks. How's it going?
It's great. Thanks for being here. Everyone, JD is a writer, and he's the author of several children's books, which is why he's joining us on the show today. But that is not all that he is. He is a man of many talents who wears many hats, including the COO of our very own Press Play podcast network, where Books with Brookes lives.
And that is probably the most exciting.
That's the most exciting part? All right, well, it's all downhill from here. No, I'm kidding. He's also, JD, let me keep bragging about you. He's also a business manager and a business strategist and the host of his very own podcast on the Press Play Podcast Network as well, The Hyman Experience, which airs every other Monday. Is that right, JD?
Every other Monday. That is correct.
Every other Monday. And so you can listen to that wherever you get your podcasts. I highly recommend. I am a dedicated listener. It's an excellent series. It's beautiful audio, beautiful sound quality, and terrific content. So JD, congratulations on your podcast.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. But really, I've lured you here today to talk about your books. I want to hear about them. So you're a self-published author of how many? 3 children's books?
There are 3 books, and yes, 3.
3. So tell me, how did you come to write your first book?
Okay, so I used to work at a middle school, and I was working one-on-one with a student who had really low reading scores, and his reading level was actually dramatically lower than the rest of his class. He was in 7th grade, and I think the level he was at was closer to a 2nd grader. So
Wow.
he didn't like any books. I tried everything I could to get this kid to read a book. I mean, everything I could. I went to the school's library, the public library, the state library. I could not find a book that he liked. And so I started to kind of write a short story just in my spare time. And he really took to that.
Oh,
And
that's so
yeah.
sweet. That's like very, very sweet. Talk about going above and beyond.
Well, that was just the beginning because school ends, and over the summer I had an exorbitant amount of free time. And so I decided to, flesh this little short story out. And so I wrote it out, and it became a book. And then at that point, I had no idea what the publishing realm was like. It is not for the faint of heart. If that is
I've heard that.
And I had been in touch with a few small publishing houses, but the turnaround time on those were a little extreme. They had, they were already taking on so many projects. And so I just kind of looked into the self-publishing route, and I got the book printed. I came back to school the next year. This thing literally came in the day before school started. I was so proud of this book. I took it to his class, and I was like, hey, this is for, the student. Can you get this to him? And his teacher says, he transferred to a different school.
Stop. No, JD. Were you you just, like, sit down on the floor and cry? Oh, so sad.
I was so perturbed at that moment.
Those are
I
great
mean, I
word.
was so defeated. I did not know what to do with myself. I worked so hard on this book. And the thing about the book is I wrote him as the main character. So I gave the main character attributes of the student so that he could feel connected to
Yeah,
this story. And so, like,
I love
he
that.
needed it. It was his book. And so I didn't give up. I
Oh,
decided to go to the school's library and I talked to the librarian and I said, "Hey, I wrote this book over the summer. Is it possible to, put it on the shelves?" And she's like, yeah, we'll do that." They even
oh,
like made it into like an accelerated reader book so that they could take a test on it and like
wow.
get points or whatever. Um,
Oh my
so a few
gosh.
months later, I was with a friend. I said, "Hey, let me take you to the library and show you this book." So we get to the library and I don't see the book, and I'm like, "Oh no, they took it down. They didn't like it or whatever." And I was like, "Hey, I was just gonna show my friend this book that you put up," and she was like, "Oh, that book hasn't been checked in since you dropped it off." Like
People love it.
every student, I mean, they were raving over this book. I had to get additional copies to put in the library.
That's
And,
amazing.
and they would come up to me and it's like, "Hey, where's part 2? Where's part 2?" And I'm like, "Do you know how long it takes to write a book?" Like
How
I
long
can't-
did it take you to write it, if you could estimate, like, the time you spent?
that first book took every bit of 4 months.
Yeah,
And that's like us writing every day. It took
yeah,
every bit of 4 months.
wow.
It was not an easy process. It got easier with the subsequent books, but that first one was rough.
Yeah. What did you find to be the most difficult?
Um, so I never knew how to end a chapter. That was like one of my first things that I realized because I would just
Right.
write and write and write, and I was
And
like,
go,
this
and go.
this can't keep going. So,
Right.
so literally every chapter in the book ends on a cliffhanger because I just did not know.
I see
I
why
just
kids like it. You had them on tenterhooks the whole
Yeah,
time.
and so you wanna keep going, it makes you wanna keep going. It literally is a nonstop story,
Yeah.
and, so I think that was, like, the hardest part, was, like, trying to, um, section it up and, like, really, capturing a story. It's easy to write, a little short story, it's easy to write a few paragraphs, um, but when you talk about, 55,000 words, like, where are you gonna get these words from? Like, at some point you
Yeah.
run out of stuff to talk about.
That's great. And what is it called? What's the title?
The first book is called 7 Days. It's part of the Archie Kerwin Chronicles.
Oh, that is adorable. Archie Kerwin. Excellent character name. I truly love it. I am a character name connoisseur, and that's a really good one.
That's crazy. Like, I kind of am too. I am very particular about the character names, and I'm very,
Yeah.
very particular about the chapter titles.
Okay. All right. So do you find that you write your chapter titles before writing the chapter, or does that come after the content?
I would like to say 50-50, but I sat down like in the middle of the writing process, maybe, 2 or 3 chapters in, and I just wrote out a list of titles, just just a whole document of just
Okay.
titles. And then I kind of knew where the story was going to go, and so I
Yeah.
looked at the titles to see which kind of fit that theme, and that's how I picked my chapter titles. But
Sure.
between all 3 books, yeah,
I love
between
that.
all 3 books, they all share some commonalities. So chapter 13 in all 3 books is a chess move. So, yeah, so it's a lot of that throughout the entire, like, series.
Oh, that's so cool. And do you think your readers, do you think the kids are picking up on that?
Some of them do. I would say, even though it is, a young adult's book, a lot of, older people who've read the books have definitely picked up on some of the different themes that I've kind of addressed through the titles.
That's cool. I love that because it's like it's for you and it's this game that you like to play, but it's also like has to be so satisfying when people notice it, you know?
Absolutely,
That's
absolutely.
really cool. And the like specificity of it is really great. So was there a children's book or a book from childhood that inspired you to do this or a book that you love?
I would say yes. One of my favorite book, Brooke, my favorite book,
Books with Brooks. Say it 3 times fast.
my favorite book growing up was Where the Wild Things Are, and
Oh, yes.
that book just the essence of that book is
Yeah.
very evident in everything else that I write.
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of my friends and acquaintances and family are starting to have kids, and it's, like, my favorite thing to buy books for them because it's such a trip down memory lane, like, it's insane how well I remember books that I read when I was, like, 4 years old, they stick with you, you're such a little sponge at
Yeah,
that age, and it's like when I go and pick
yeah,
out the books and I read them again, I'm like, "Oh, I remember literally the words of this," like
yeah, for sure. I mean, it's not a very long book, but like I don't know why I just love that book for whatever reason. And I actually bought a copy of it just to have around in my own personal library because I love it so much.
Yes, that's really sweet. So, you said earlier that the self-publishing experience is not for the faint of heart. Do you wanna give us, just an overview of sort of how it works for
Okay,
you?
so there's lots of different options when it comes to self-publishing. There's lots of companies out there that do self-publishing, but depending on what option you go with, it can be very tedious. So one route I
Sure.
was new at this. I didn't know what I was doing, so I was just kind of like putting my feelers out. And so I came across one company,
Yeah.
and you had to buy a proof. You had to physically buy the proof before you could like approve it to be published. So I would get everything put in there, hit the publish button, buy the proof, and I would get it in the mail, and then I would find a mistake and I would fix it
No.
and re-upload it, and I'd have to buy
Ugh.
another proof. Yeah, and
Oh,
so at one
no.
point, I want to say I had about 13 copies of this first book, and it was around that time I was like, okay, this isn't going to work. Like, I can't keep doing this. This is too expensive. And so I ended up going over to Amazon, which used to be called Create Space. And they let you get a digital proof, so you didn't have to like physically buy the book to proof it, I should say.
Right.
um but
Yeah.
then when I started writing more
Yeah.
books, I actually hired an editor, um and that was godsend because I didn't know what I was doing. I was good at English, I was good at grammar, but
Yeah.
you can't write a book and edit it yourself.
Mhm.
It's just not a thing.
No. Absolutely. I so agree with you because you become completely blind to your
Right,
own mistakes. It's like you can't see it anymore because 'cause you're too close to it or something.
that's exactly what it is.
Yeah. That's cool. How'd you find your editor?
Through Upwork, actually.
Oh, wow. Okay, cool. That's good to know. I
Yeah.
use Upwork occasionally, so that's great.
But my editor, her name is Kim, she was phenomenal. And she loved the books. I actually sent her a set of the books because she and her kids fell in love with them while she was editing. Yeah, and she was actually the person who inspired me to continue writing.
Oh, really? That's so nice. So she
Yeah,
was
she's
supportive.
like, where's the rest of it? I need
Yeah.
more.
Well, if you're writing cliffhanger after cliffhanger JD, it sounds like you should be like a show writer. Sounds like you'd be excellent at writing a series where you gotta like dangle a carrot every half hour, you know?
I honestly thought, that could be a thing.
Absolutely.
Hey everyone, it's Cameron Justice, co-host of the Orange is Orange or Browns podcast. Make sure you check us out for everything Browns. We got you covered before the game, after the game. Here are our takes, here are our feedback, here are our criticisms, and our praises. If you like the Browns, you're going to love this podcast.
I have ambitions to write a book, and every time I even think about it, I get so overwhelmed. I'm like, okay, think about that later. Put that away for now. Because it sounds so daunting to sit down and write a book. Like you said, where do the words come from? So I am so impressed by anyone I talk to who's completed a book, let alone 3 of them, and especially a children's book. That's so special. And I feel like you're teaching lessons, and you're teaching, emotions, and you're teaching, like, there's just so much in there. It's not just a story.
Yeah, for sure. And I will say, um, the first book is technically not the first book. It's the first completed book. Um,
Oh,
there
okay,
was a
okay.
point before I finished the first book, I had written a completely different story. And I was about 3/4 of the way done, and my computer got stolen.
No. Okay.
And this book was just gone.
You're not the only person I know that this has happened to. I feel so bad for both of you. This happened to shout out to my friend Kelly. Her laptop got stolen with her book on it, and she was also like almost done with it. It's so bad. I'm so sorry.
Talk about a
That's
punch to the
heartbreaking.
gut. Yeah. And I don't know how I found the will to keep going after that, because I'm pretty sure I was more upset that the book was gone than that the actual computer was gone. Like,
Yeah, absolutely. That's your blood, sweat, and tears. Like, your brain is in there.
yes.
Oh man, what a bummer. So you didn't go back to that story then? You started
I
fresh?
started fresh. I had to abandon that idea because there was no way I could recreate all the greatness that was that story. So,
Right.
and I didn't want to do that
Yeah.
story a disservice by trying to piecemeal it back together. So I started fresh. I
Mhm.
started from scratch.
Yeah. Yeah, because I feel like it could be better. Maybe it would be better, or it could be just like a shadow of its original self,
Yeah, yeah.
you know?
I don't doubt that I won't, not finish that book, but I couldn't in that time. I was grieving. There was a lot of grieving
Yes.
going on, but
Yes.
more
Absolutely.
time was
Oh,
passed.
I can
I was
imagine.
like, I got to get
Oh,
back
I'm
into
so
this.
sorry.
It was rough.
Yeah, you gotta save that stuff to the cloud,
Hey, I
JD.
know that now.
You learned your
Oh my
lesson. So
gosh.
do you have plans to write more? Are there more coming in the series? Are there other books in the works?
As far as the series, I would say that Archie's story is kind of wrapped up. However, um, I had written for an anthology that was published. I don't even know when this anthology was published, but in that anthology, I published a short story called Magnificent. And I actually included this short story at the end of the third book. So it's like you read through the book and then you get to this short story. And it's about a
Oh.
whole different person, but it's in the same universe as Archie's story, but it's a completely different
Uh-huh.
person, completely different character, different storyline. They don't even like intersect at all. And I thought about, fleshing that out more and, doing another series about those characters.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you're not actively working as a teacher anymore, are you?
No, no, no. Well, yes and no. I am a part-time college professor. Um, so
But you're not working with like
no,
kids
no, 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 no,
like you used to
no.
be. Yeah. So do you feel like as connected to that project, or maybe more connected to it because you're not working with kids all the time? Like how do you feel about that?
I kind of think that is why, I have not, pursued that any longer. Um, I
Yeah.
do plan to do it, but at that time the kids were really wanting this story. And there were
Yeah.
some kids that they were like the fan of fans. Like they were the people who dressed up as Harry Potter, to go see the movies. They were that type of fan
Right.
for this book series. And
Right.
several of them came up to me and said, JD, I want to be in your book. Even if you have to kill me off, I want to be in the
Oh,
book.
that's
And
amazing.
so I put these two
Oh,
students in the
how
book. I put them in the
cool.
third book, and I totally, the one that wanted to die off, I totally killed him off. I gave him a great death. But he's in the book. I use
That is so
I
cool.
use his name and everything, like he's in the book. He was flabbergasted when I like handed him a copy. He sees his quote on the back of the book, like because he had told me something, and I kind of took it and put it on the back of the book.
That's so sweet. Also, like, truly a life-changing experience. Like, that's something that kid is going to remember forever. That's going to be something he talks about when you have to give like an interesting fact about yourself. Like that's
Oh, for
so cool.
sure, for
I would have
sure.
loved that as a kid. Actually, whoa, this is something I haven't thought about in like 20 years, but I'm just thinking my 3rd grade teacher wrote not a book. It wasn't like a full book, but she at the end of our school year wrote like a series of short stories about all of us in her class, and we all had different characters,
Oh,
and she
that's
drew
awesome.
different like characters of us. I literally haven't thought about this in like 20 years. She was an amazing teacher. It's like my favorite teacher ever. Mrs. Simon, shout out if you're listening. I'm sure she's not, although we are friends on Facebook.
That's awesome,
But
though.
she was like, it was like kind of like, it was just such a like, it was so cool to see yourself as a character in print and to like know that someone thought about you and noticed you and like noticed qualities about you. And I don't know, as a kid I felt like that was like a moving, like memorable experience. Very cool.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. When I was writing the first book, I would pay attention to this student in class, and I would kind of look at his mannerisms. I looked at how he talked to other people. I looked at, his relationships outside of the classroom, and I tried my best to capture his entire personality to put him in this book.
That's so cool.
And at some point, it was well after, the third book was written. His old teacher, we were friends on Facebook, and she got hold of me and she said he got the book. And I was like so excited. I was like, did
Oh.
he say anything? And she was like, well, all he said was thank you.
Oh.
Like, she was like, I was like, okay, you know what? I'll take what I can get. At
Yeah.
least he got the book.
Take what you can get. That's so cool. Good for you,
But by
JD.
that time, the other kids were like so into this book that it was a much bigger thing than just as one student. Um, there was one kid, he came up to me and he said, hey, I drew this, and this is because the books have like I won't say zombies, but they have like a little monster type deal
Mhm.
in them. And he brings this drawing up to me and he says, hey, this is what I think the monsters kind of look like in the book. This is what, I pictured when I was reading it. And I looked at it and I was like, that is awesome. So I took that drawing, and that is now the cover art, the inside cover art of the
Oh,
book.
cool. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really fun.
And each book has like a cover art, and each one of them was, contributed to the book by someone that I know. So,
Wow. What do you have any advice for other aspiring authors, maybe like myself or others who are listening?
yes, I do. And the reason why I say I do is because, in addition to like all of the praise that I was getting from this book from the students, many of them would bring me their own stories and the things that they were writing. And, throughout that process, I saw that, they wanted to be artists and dancers and musicians and writers, and they wanted to be all these things. And I could see it in these writings. So my
Mm.
advice is to not, you don't have to write a book. You don't have to write an essay. It can be just a short story, just write one chapter, write 7 pages of something, and see where that takes you. And a good chapter, I would say, is between 7 and 10 pages. So if you can write 7 pages again and again and again and again, you've written a book.
Yeah, absolutely. So break it up.
Break it up. Because it's
Yeah.
daunting to think, 55,000 words. And
Mm-hmm.
that's a very conservative number for a book, but you know, it's very daunting to think about writing a 20 chapter book. But if you can just, look at it in parts, kind of
Mm-hmm.
picture it out, plan out your
Mm-hmm.
storyboard, the story will come to you.
I love it. That's great advice. I will try to take it as well. My issue, although actually the pandemic is helping with this, but my issue is that I don't I have so much trouble sitting down and writing. Like I would rather do anything else. This is common. I know a lot of writers deal with this, but I get so distracted. I'd rather be around people. It's sort of a lonely
Yeah.
process and
I don't know how I did it. I don't know how I did it because, I'm a very sociable person. I'm thinking back, I don't know when I had time to write these books.
yeah, you're like, when did I do
I'm
it?
like, when did I do this? I remember the first one, it was like over the summer. I was like in my dorm. Like, I cannot tell you for the love of anything, like where I was when I was writing the second and third book. And the second book was the hardest thing. That was the hardest thing I'd ever done in my life. But I had to
Wow.
do it because those kids were begging.
They were. You had a clamoring
They
audience to
were beating the
satisfy.
door down, so I had no choice. I had to write that book.
There you go. So really the secret is to have, yeah, people forcing you to, although that doesn't work all the time. George R. R. Martin, where are ya?
The people are waiting.
They are. They're waiting.
And
No, that's great.
I had to give the people what they wanted. So
Yes. I'm so glad you did. But they were cute little kids.
that helped.
Well, is there anything else you wanted to talk about regarding the books or self-publishing or anything we touched on that I didn't ask you?
I would say one of the things that I enjoyed about the whole story process, the whole writing the story, was watching the characters evolve and watching them grow. And I got a sense of what it's like um, to be a part of that environment, that community. You become invested in those
Mhm.
things. Um, I can tell you about the entire world of this book just because I was so far into it that I was in this story. And so like I say, when I included attributes of my student in this main
Mhm.
character, I also included bits and pieces of myself because I saw the challenges that this kid was experiencing. And I wanted him to know that he had all the strength inside of him to overcome any challenge that, came before him. And so I gave his character all those characteristics, all those attributes to conquer all those obstacles. And I became a stronger person because I started to look up to this character in this book. And 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 I see that in so many people who read this book. And it's not just it's a great story, it's that, I really learned about myself in reading this book, and I learned about myself in writing this book, and I think those
Oh,
things go hand in hand somehow.
I'm gonna cry.
Yeah, part of it is when you watch your favorite TV show or you read your favorite book, you want it to end a certain way. You want everything to tie up in a nice happy bow. And now I know why people don't do that because that doesn't make a great story. And so I knew I couldn't just wrap everything up in a nice pretty bow. And so when I wrote these characters, they are struggling. They have things that they are dealing with. They are grieving. I never even experienced, I didn't experience some of the things that Archie has experienced in his life, but I grieved for the things that Archie that was on his heart, the things that bothered him. And it's crazy to think that, these characters came alive in such a dramatic way, in like a real way for so many people.
Making a big impact. Well, JD, this has been truly a pleasure. I'm over here wiping my tears away. So inspiring. Everyone, please go check out JD's podcast, the Hyman podcast, Hyman. You can find that wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you have a podcast idea, if you've been wanting to do a podcast, reach out to us. We would love to help you. That's what we're doing with the Press Play Podcast Network. We want to help people get going and get their voices heard and tell their stories. It's so important, especially right now. So yeah, JD, I appreciate your time so much. I'm so proud of the work that you do, and I think your books are amazing.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be able to talk about those books. And I haven't in a really long time. So this is like probably the first time in 5 or 6 years where I've, really dug into, where they came from. So I really appreciate you pulling that back out of me. It's kind of refreshing to relive it a little bit.
Yes, of course. I'm so happy to. Well, we will all benefit from your wisdom. Thank you for sharing.
Anytime.
Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye. Books with Brookes is in the Press Play Podcast Network, and our theme music is by Jonathan Allen.